Let's dive into the juicy life of Chae Harin, a determined and ambitious young professional, as she navigates the challenges of working under the demanding director Moon Junghoo, the sole heir to the Moon Group conglomerate. Harin's on the phone with director Moon, asking him why they're not giving something a shot. She's aware she's not perfect, but she's eager to prove herself. Before she can even finish her sentence, director Moon leans in and kisses her, then raises her chin and asks if she's sure she can handle what's coming. Harin responds confidently that she can, and director Moon pulls her up, reminding her that she's the one who chose to take on this challenge. As Harin walks into the office, she's surrounded by colleagues busy typing away on their computers. She lets out a sigh, and just then, a message pops up on her screen from director Moon, asking her to come see him for a minute. She responds quickly, then turns to her colleague, Mr. An, to let him know that director Moon needs her. Mr. An comments that director Moon always seems to be calling for her and wishes her good luck. Harin smiles, grabs her things, and heads out. As she walks to director Moon's office, she can't help but think about the man himself, a total workaholic with a lot on his plate, and wonders what he wants to see her about this time. Director Moon is in his office, listening to the LSB news report about the Moon Group. He can't help but think that he used to be the kind of charismatic young superior that people would daydream about having a romance with. Meanwhile, outside his office, a male worker is chatting with his female colleague, asking if she's working late today. She responds that there's a sudden issue they need to deal with, and it's getting annoying. Just then, Director Moon walks towards them, and they both greet him, but feel awkward when he doesn't respond. The guy wonders what it would be like to work under someone as perfect as Director Moon, who seems to be everyone's idol. But that's also what makes him intimidating. Everyone either wants him or wants to be like him, which is why Miss Chae had to give up her crush on him. Miss Chae recalls the moment she told Mr. An that she's quitting, but he refused to let her leave until the project is over. She also remembers the phone call with Director Moon, where she asked if he was coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning. She thinks back to the time Director Moon chewed them out for not meeting his expectations, earning him the nickname Devil's Mouth, or DM for short. With a deep breath, Miss Chae stands outside Director Moon's office, brushes her hair, and knocks on the door. When he tells her to come in, she opens the door and greets him, but freezes at the entrance, staring at his chest. She quickly composes herself and says she'll wait outside, but Director Moon tells her to come in. He asks her to come closer, and as she does, he raises his tie and asks for her help putting it on. As she fixes his tie, Director Moon's gaze lingers on her, soft and full of love. He tells her to go to his house after work and wait for him there, reminding her not to forget their deal. Director Moon is on the phone with Miss Chae, suggesting that she come to his home after work today. He asks if she still remembers their promise, and Miss Chae is caught off guard, busy typing away on her laptop. She calls Director Moon, asking if he has anything to say to her. He responds that she's been avoiding him lately, and asks if she doesn't have something to say to him too. Miss Chae clarifies that he's misunderstood, and that if he has something to say, he should just say it. Director Moon seems uncertain, hoping it's just a misunderstanding. He brings up the resignation letter and asks Miss Chae to explain herself. Just as she's about to respond, he interrupts, asking if the task he gave her was so easy that she has to risk her life. Miss Chae recalls the moment she cried out for help, lying helpless on the ground, pleading for someone to save her. She assures Director Moon that it's not what he's thinking. He reaches for her hair, teasing that the task must be too easy since he does it every night. Miss Chae explains that she's actually thinking of finding other ways to repay him. Director Moon asks what she's learned, and Miss Chae responds that she's currently working part-time, swearing that there's no other reason. Sitting close to her, Director Moon sighs and calls her Secretary Chae. She responds, and he asks why he likes her, to which she replies that she doesn't know. Director Moon responds that he likes Secretary Chae because she's both perceptive and quick-witted. However, he looks disappointed, and his expression catches her off guard. He says that he thought their relationship was solid, but the resignation letter suggests otherwise. He questions if this is also a misunderstanding. Secretary Chae explains that she's grateful for his praise, but, as the youngest in the secretariat, she's been getting a lot of unwanted attention. She reveals that there are rumors spreading in the secretary's office about their relationship, and it's affecting her reputation. She recalls the moment she overheard her colleagues discussing her and the CEO. One of them asks Mr. An about the rumors, and he responds that the CEO has been taking care of Secretary Chae from the beginning. The colleagues start gossiping about how Secretary Chae must have seduced the CEO, and they all share a laugh. Director Moon listens intently and then questions if their relationship is an unhealthy one. Secretary Chae gives an example of a couple, but Director Moon catches on, asking if she's referring to him and her. She stays silent, and Director Moon hums thoughtfully. He then suggests that they should just become an unhealthy couple, and that way they won't have to worry about the rumors anymore. However, Secretary Chae explains that's not what she meant. Director Moon proposes that they be in an unhealthy relationship, and Secretary Chae is taken aback. She thinks about it for a moment, and then says it's not that simple. They both stare at each other, the tension between them palpable. Secretary Chae is taken aback, turning her head in surprise and slight fear. She says that the issue isn't that simple, but Director Moon thinks it's an easy problem to solve. He questions why she rejected his help if her goal was to pay off her debt from the beginning. Secretary Chae explains that even if she were to become a couple with Director Moon, the rumors would still spread. But Director Moon reveals that she's the one who openly holds his life in her hands, and Secretary Chae admits that she feels guilty for earning a high salary without needing much skill. Director Moon disagrees, saying it's impossible for her to feel that way. Secretary Chae confesses that she genuinely wants to do something for him, which is why she wrote the resignation letter. Director Moon immediately stands up, asking what kind of job she considers ideal. Secretary Chae thinks for a moment before responding that she's not sure. She wonders if Director Moon just heard the sound of his own heartbeat. Director Moon touches her chin, suggesting that she continue her job until she finds another meaningful one. Secretary Chae feels his warm hand and, without realizing it, says that they should be partners. Director Moon questions if she knows what that means, and Secretary Chae affirms, stating that there are still many shortcomings, but if he's okay with it. Director Moon kisses her, asking if he can really handle this. Secretary Chae mutters that she can do it, and Director Moon tells her not to forget that she made this choice. The next morning, Secretary Chae leaves a note on Director Moon's pillow, writing that the previous night was wonderful. She finished typing everything, prepared a simple breakfast for him, and mentions that they'll see each other at the office. Director Moon reads the first line out loud, then crumples the paper, wondering if Secretary Chae is teasing him. As Secretary Chae walks home, she can't help but think about the previous night's events. Lost in thought, she's startled when she sees Director Moon standing in front of her. He says they need to have a little talk. Director Moon asks where she was, and Secretary Chae replies that she went to a bathhouse. He raises an eyebrow, questioning if she usually goes to the bathhouse this early in the morning. Secretary Chae hums, then asks what Director Moon is doing there. He suggests they talk somewhere private, and Secretary Chae invites him up to her house. As they enter her home, Secretary Chae tells Director Moon to make himself comfortable. She mentions that she turned on the boiler before she left, so the house should be warm enough. She offers him a seat and heads to the kitchen to prepare some green tea. Director Moon suggests she sit with him, since they're not at work. As they sit together, Director Moon comments that her home is a bit cramped. Secretary Chae responds that it's enough space for her and her sister to live in. Director Moon asks about her father, and Secretary Chae reveals that she hasn't heard from him in 6 months. Director Moon falls silent for a moment before asking why she left his house so suddenly. Secretary Chae explains that she simply came home after doing what she had to do. Director Moon presses her, asking if yesterday was just business as usual for her. Secretary Chae assures him that's not what she meant. She just didn't have any reason to linger at his house, so she went home. She confesses that she really enjoyed the previous night, but Director Moon reveals that he feels like a piece of gum that was chewed up and spit out. Secretary Chae is taken aback, asking how he could say that. Director Moon wonders if this is all just another misunderstanding. Secretary Chae responds that it's not exactly a misunderstanding. Director Moon thought they were both sober and consenting the previous night, but now he's unsure. Secretary Chae stays silent, unsure of what to say. Director Moon states that they both wanted what happened, and he could tell she desired it too. He admits that he was afraid she regretted their night together, which is why he came to her house to find her. Secretary Chae questions what Director Moon would have done if she regretted their night together and ran away. He responds with a sly smile, saying he would have found her and given her a proper punishment. Secretary Chae's curiosity gets the better of her, asking what kind of punishment and how. Director Moon leans in, his voice low and husky, saying she can run if she's curious. But instead of giving her space, he leans in closer, commenting on how nice she smells. Secretary Chae pushes him away, saying he's too close, and Director Moon responds by saying her body feels cold. As he leans in again, Secretary Chae stops him, saying his name. She assures him that if he's trying to make her feel better about the previous night, he doesn't have to. Director Moon stares intensely, telling her to continue. Secretary Chae repeats that she enjoyed the previous night, and if he did too, she'd like to leave it at that. However, she makes it clear that she didn't do it to get his attention, but because she wanted to. Director Moon responds, saying he's not the type of man to treat intimacy like it was nothing. Just then, Secretary Chae questions if someone found out about them. Director Moon replies that he thought they both wanted to dive into this relationship. Secretary Chae corrects him, saying that wasn't her intention. Before she can elaborate, Director Moon pulls her forward and gives her a kiss. Their intimate moment is interrupted by a voice from outside, calling out to Secretary Chae. They freeze, their eyes locking in a mix of surprise and unspoken tension. The voice belongs to Yejin, Secretary Chae's sister, who walks in on them still inches apart. Secretary Chae quickly separates from Director Moon, and Yejin's gaze lands on them, her eyes narrowing. Secretary Chae tries to play it cool, saying her name, while Yejin questions if Director Moon is the guy who made her cry. Yejin stares angrily at Director Moon, questioning if he's the one who made her sister cry. Director Moon asks if Secretary Chae cried, and Yejin denies it. Yejin warns Director Moon not to make her sister sad, at least not if he claims to love her. Secretary Chae tries to intervene, but Yejin's words hang in the air. Secretary Chae suggests they go to the convenience store, blaming her hunger for her sensitivity. She tries to convince Yejin, pushing her towards the door, promising to buy her everything she wants to eat. Yejin agrees, but tells Secretary Chae to stop pushing her. As they leave, the door slams shut, leaving Director Moon sitting silently. As Secretary Chae walks back home with Yejin, she notices the rain and wonders if Director Moon made it home safely. Unbeknownst to her, someone covers her with an umbrella, and she turns around to see Director Moon standing there. He asks if she's done, and Secretary Chae questions if he was waiting for her the whole time, noticing that it's almost night. Director Moon asks if she remembers that she has work to do, but Secretary Chae doesn't respond. Instead, she points out that his jacket is all wet. Director Moon pulls her close and hugs her, saying he's given their situation some thought. He admits that he can't separate his emotions from his body like she can, and confesses that he might just be a fling for her. But it's not like that for him. Secretary Chae tells him not to say that, insisting she never thought about their relationship that way. Director Moon confesses that Secretary Chae might not want anything from him, but he has plenty of things he wants from her. She says his name, and he reveals that he had plans for them that morning, but she left before he could make his move. Secretary Chae asks what he was planning to do with her, and Director Moon responds with a sly smile, saying anything. As they drive, Secretary Chae expresses concern that her sister might have said something to upset him. Director Moon slams on the brakes, asking if she meant something that might get him upset. Secretary Chae explains that she talked to her sister to help her understand, so she wouldn't be rude to him again. But Director Moon reveals that he wasn't upset by her sister's words, but by the fact that Secretary Chae cried. She exclaims in surprise, and Director Moon teases her, saying she's full of surprises. Secretary Chae denies it, but Director Moon points out the contradictions in her behavior, from writing a letter saying she enjoyed their night together to crying about it afterwards. Secretary Chae tries to explain, saying it's not like that, but Director Moon interrupts, saying there's a specific word for a situation like theirs. Secretary Chae asks what it is, and Director Moon leans in to kiss her, saying it's commonly known as hitting the jackpot. He reminds her that their being together is also part of her reality. He pats her hair and suggests they get going. After parking the car, Director Moon helps Secretary Chae out, and she mutters reality under her breath. Director Moon tells her to listen, saying that if he ever hears her crying about something like that again, he really won't hold back next time. He tells her to cry when he's by her side if she wants to, saying that will be much more effective. As they walk, Director Moon holds Secretary Chae tightly, and she keeps quiet, following his lead. She points out a security camera, but he assures her he's aware of it. She asks him to let go of her hand, worried someone might see them, but Director Moon tells her they should keep going. Secretary Chae questions if she must, and Director Moon explains that the elevator only goes up to the penthouse, which only he has access to. He reassures her that no one will see them or what they're doing. He teases her, saying it's a shame she lost another reason to stay away from him, and if he'd known how much she liked kissing, he'd have done it sooner. As Secretary Chae works on her computer, Director Moon's mind wanders back to their kiss. She asks if that's all for tonight, noticing the workload seems lighter than usual. Director Moon doesn't respond, so she decides to finish quickly. As he approaches, he exclaims, "Oh my," at the numerous typos on her screen. He asks if she's nervous, then shares his observation that every time he approaches, she tenses up. He wonders if he's the reason for her nervousness, finding the idea absurd. Director Moon confesses that he wants her to spend the night again and asks if that would be okay with her. As they snuggle in bed, Director Moon kisses Secretary Chae, saying they already agreed to be intimate, so there's no need for her to be shy. He teases her about silencing the beautiful sound and suggests they go to bed. As they cuddle, Secretary Chae stares at him, touches his face, then sits up. Director Moon wraps his hand around her, questioning if she's running away. Secretary Chae reassures him she's just going to the restroom. Director Moon echoes the restroom and confesses he doesn't want to be apart from her. Secretary Chae promises to return quickly. As Secretary Chae opens the door, she wipes water off her face, muttering, "Way to go, Chae Harin." She's surprised to see Director Moon cooking in the kitchen. He tells her to sit and enjoy the meal, saying it's her overtime pay. Secretary Chae thanks him, but also tells him he doesn't need to do this anymore. Director Moon teases her about saying thank you and don't at the same time, asking what she means. Secretary Chae explains that their relationship should be mutual, and he shouldn't feel pressured to be nice, as it might make her uncomfortable. If he's having trouble drawing a line between work and life, she suggests they terminate the relationship. Director Moon listens intently, his expression thoughtful. He seems to be considering her words, weighing the pros and cons of their unconventional relationship. Secretary Chae watches him, wondering what's going through his mind. The tension between them is palpable, as they both navigate the complexities of their feelings for each other. Director Moon stands up immediately, walks up to Secretary Chae, and says her name. He firmly states that he decides whether he wants to terminate their relationship or not. He notes that he'll make her feel comfortable with receiving his kindness soon, and pleads with her not to bring up quitting again. At the office, Miss Kang questions whether Director Moon's mother's visit will make things difficult. Mr. An notes that neither Director Moon nor his mother is someone to be messed with. Miss Kang adds that someone had to come when Secretary Chae was out. Mr. An mentions that Director Moon's mother doesn't care for either of them, but she was pleased with Secretary Chae. Miss Kang turns to Secretary Chae and tells her to come with her. She informs Secretary Chae that Director Moon's mother came to visit while she was out. Secretary Chae nervously says, "Oh," and comments on Director Moon always sending his mother away with comforting words and empty promises. She notes that it was bad this time. Miss Kang comments that Director Moon's mom must have come to discuss getting him engaged, but Miss Kang notes that it was even more complicated than that this time. Mr. An states that it looks like Director Moon's mom isn't the one trying to set up this marriage, but his dad. Secretary Chae is surprised to hear this, while Mr. An questions what if they all get fired. He notes that this is exactly why they say one should watch the company they keep at the workplace. He spills that they need Secretary Chae to persuade Director Moon, and she frightenedly questions if he means her. Miss Kang tells her to talk to Director Moon, make him go on the blind date his father arranged for him, and as his secretaries, they should help the director make the right choice. Secretary Chae tells Miss Kang to come on, knowing she can't do that. Miss Kang reminds her that she has a better chance at persuading Director Moon than they do, since he adores her. She encourages Secretary Chae to go talk to him about it at least, but Secretary Chae tells her to wait a second. Standing at the door to his office, Secretary Chae mumbles to herself that Director Moon is going to hate this. She sighs, then knocks on the door. Director Moon answers, telling her to come in. When she enters, he questions what's on her mind. She replies that she has something to ask him. Director Moon glances at her and she spills that she heard his mother came to visit and arranged a blind date for him. She asks if he really isn't going. Director Moon wonders why she's asking him this question, then asks if she's trying to figure out his intentions or persuade him to go. Secretary Chae responds that she's asking personally, and Director Moon echoes, personally. She then says she thinks he should go. Director Moon questions if she knows what going on that blind date would mean. Secretary Chae responds that if there's someone good enough for him, he might want to consider getting married. Director Moon grabs her hand immediately, telling her to make her choice. He questions if she's on his side or just another secretary at his office. However, he asks if she really wants this, explaining further that he's asking if she really wants him to go on that blind date, find himself a woman and get married. Secretary Chae affirms that it's what he should do. Director Moon says very well and walks away from her. Secretary Chae tells him that she'll be heading out. As she reaches for the door, Director Moon places a jacket on her. She turns around and he tells her to take it off. Secretary Chae says, "Pardon," and Director Moon repeats that she should take it off. He looks at her intensely, his expression unreadable. Secretary Chae hesitates, unsure of what to do next. Secretary Chae apologizes, saying she doesn't understand, and Director Moon questions if she's going to leave wearing the jacket. She remains silent, but as she raises her hand, she realizes her sleeve button is off. She thinks to herself, "Oh no, my sleeve button." She recalls the moment Director Moon grabbed her hand and told her not to leave, and she notes that the button must have fallen off then. Director Moon steps forward, holds her waist, and asks if he should take the jacket off for her. Secretary Chae declines, saying she'll put it on herself. But Director Moon insists, saying she can't go anywhere with her shirt like that. He loosens the muffler and Secretary Chae tells him to let her do it herself. She asks him to wait, and Director Moon questions if he's the one who hurt her hand. Secretary Chae responds that it's okay, and Director Moon teases her, saying it serves her right for cutting his heart. Secretary Chae apologizes, and Director Moon asks if that's all. She asks what he wants her to say, and Director Moon asks if she'd say it if he told her. Secretary Chae guesses it depends on the answer. Director Moon tells her she has it good, easily switching up what she says depending on the circumstances. Secretary Chae disagrees, saying she's not capable of doing that. Director Moon confesses that he likes her so much, even when she's doing terrible things like telling him to get married to some woman. He then drops a bombshell, saying he'll go on that blind date with her. Secretary Chae protests, saying it's not possible because it's inappropriate. Director Moon ignores her concerns, telling her to help him get ready instead. Secretary Chae bows down, saying she'll do anything to help him. Director Moon's expression softens, and he looks at her with a mix of amusement and affection. Back in the secretary's office, Miss Kang calls out to Secretary Chae, eager to know what happened. She questions what Secretary Chae is wearing, noticing it's one of Director Moon's shirts. Secretary Chae hums and explains that Director Moon accidentally spilled coffee on her. Miss Kang raises an eyebrow, questioning if Director Moon threw coffee at her when she brought up the blind date. Secretary Chae remains silent, and Miss Kang asks if it's a no to the date. Secretary Chae hesitantly says, "Well," and Miss Kang exclaims, "Oh no, we're doomed." Miss Kang then reveals that the blind date is scheduled for that evening at dinner. Secretary Chae questions if it's really that evening, and Miss Kang affirms. Secretary Chae wonders what they should do, and jokingly suggests it might be too late to work for Mr. Choi instead. Miss Kang laughs, mentioning that Mr. Choi is unofficially the second most popular person in the company. She teases Secretary Chae, asking if she'd like to apply to Mr. Choi's office together. Just then, Director Moon walks in, noticing the two secretaries chatting. He thinks they're discussing something interesting and asks if he can join the conversation. Miss Kang quickly covers, saying it's not what it looks like. Director Moon says they'll talk about it later and asks if they can call it a day. However, he reminds Secretary Chae that she's coming with him. Miss Kang raises an eyebrow, curious about what's going on. Director Moon's expression remains calm, but there's a hint of excitement in his voice. Secretary Chae looks unsure, but she knows she can't escape Director Moon's plans that easily. As they step out of the building, Secretary Chae follows Director Moon, who leads the way to the elevator. Inside, he informs her that his chauffeur has prepared new clothes for him. Secretary Chae assures him that she'll double-check everything and arrange for him to change as soon as possible. But Director Moon corrects her, saying he wasn't talking about his clothes. Secretary Chae questions what he meant, and Director Moon replies that she offered to help him. He tells her she can't go out dressed like that, and Secretary Chae asks when he told her to get prepared. Was it so he could take her on a date? She reiterates that it's completely inappropriate and impossible. Director Moon reminds her that she promised to do whatever it takes to help him. Secretary Chae backpedals, saying that's not what she meant. Director Moon's expression turns serious as he tells her to listen. He warns her that if he ever hears her crying about something like that again, he really won't hold back next time. The tension between them is palpable, and Secretary Chae looks taken aback by Director Moon's intensity. She seems to be realizing that she's in over her head with her boss's demands. Director Moon thinks it'll take Secretary Chae half a month to quit, but he's surprised to learn she gets along with the other secretaries. He guesses he was wrong, and Secretary Chae tells him to pardon. Before he can finish saying, "It's nothing," Miss Kang leans on his shoulder, feeling dizzy. An springs up immediately, helping her up and telling her to wake up. Director Moon, feeling annoyed, tells Mr. An to take Miss Kang home and call it a day. Mr. An affirms he will, and Miss Kang excitedly shouts, "Yahoo! I'm going home!" Mr. An tells her to stay still, but she bids Director Moon farewell, saying she'll see him tomorrow. Director Moon stands up, suggesting they both call it a day as well. Secretary Chae draws his attention to the leftover food, saying there's a lot. She asks if she can take it home, but Director Moon interrupts, telling her to take it home or finish it right there, whatever she wants. Secretary Chae thanks him and says she'll have it wrapped up in no time. Director Moon walks away, leaving Secretary Chae to handle the leftovers. Standing outside the building, Director Moon checks his wristwatch. Shortly, the door behind him opens, and Secretary Chae walks up to him. She apologizes for taking so long, but Director Moon tells her not to worry about it. She helps him with a lighter, and he asks if she smokes. Secretary Chae replies no, she doesn't, and Director Moon questions why she has a lighter. Secretary Chae explains that she's been keeping items he often needs in her purse. She offers to put them back and never do it again if he doesn't like it. Director Moon stares at her for a while, then questions what her name is. Secretary Chae responds that she's Chae Harin, and Director Moon says, "All right, Miss Chae." He tells her to take over the task of reporting his personal schedule starting tomorrow. Secretary Chae questions if she's the one, and Director Moon affirms, saying once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Secretary Chae happily responds, "Yes, sir," and says he can count on her. Director Moon chuckles, seemingly pleased with her enthusiasm. He mentions giving her a pack but changes his mind, saying he'll hold on to it himself. However, Chae thinks it's a bit too much, so she says she'll be more careful from now on. Director Moon calls her and thanks her. Standing by the window, Miss Chae's face flashes through his mind. He dials Mr. On's number, and when he picks up, Director Moon informs him that he may go home early today. Mr. On excuses himself, questioning if Director Moon is feeling all right, but Director Moon ends the call. He picks up his suitcase and steps out, driving his car through the exit. As he drives, he notices a man pulling Secretary Chae close to a black van. Director Moon's eyes narrow and he mutters her name. He remains calm, following the van as it parks near a nondescript building. Director Moon gets out of his car, staring at the building, and calls security. He instructs them to check the CCTV cameras at the front gate and give him the license plate numbers of all black vans they see. Inside the building, Secretary Chae demands to know where her father is. The man in red sneers, asking if it's her daddy, and says he's probably out shouting dice somewhere with her life on the betting table. Secretary Chae reminds him that he promised her father would be there to take her home. The man tells her to shut up, hitting her. Undeterred, Secretary Chae asks again where her father is, yelling for them to bring him to her now. The guy raises her up, telling her to pay what her father owes if she wants to see him again. He threatens to sell her off instead, and Secretary Chae curses him, asking what century he thinks this is. The man raises his hand again, but before he can hit her, someone intervenes, hitting him and sending him to the ground. Director Moon rushes towards Secretary Chae, questioning if she's all right, and hugs her tightly. Secretary Chae wakes up to find herself on Director Moon's bed. She sits up, and he tells her to lie down a bit longer. He closes the book he's holding and mentions that she might still be in shock. Secretary Chae questions how, and Director Moon reveals that he paid off her father's debt. She's taken aback, asking why he did that, and stating that he shouldn't have to. Director Moon responds that it's just money, and it's nothing compared to the price of a life. Secretary Chae's curiosity gets the better of her, and she asks why he would care about her father's life. Director Moon interrupts, saying it's not her father's life he's concerned about, but hers. Director Moon tells Secretary Chae that he isn't doing this out of the goodness of his heart, of course. He states that he'd like her to take on some private tasks for him every night. He knows it's a gamble, but he's afraid that if he doesn't make her stay by his side, she'll drift away from him. Standing in front of a hotel, Director Moon questions how much longer he can possibly wait. Secretary Chae reminds him that she agreed to spend a night with him, but she never agreed to be in this kind of relationship. Director Moon asks what she means, and Secretary Chae explains that she just wanted to do something nice for him. However, Director Moon questions if he looks like an animal to her, someone who takes advantage of any woman he sees. Secretary Chae responds that the way he looks at her made her think he wanted something, and at the time, she wanted it too. But Director Moon explains that he can't get intimate with someone and just forget about it. Secretary Chae replies that he doesn't have to forget. They can do it whenever and however often he wants. Director Moon's expression softens, and he looks at Secretary Chae with a mix of longing and curiosity. Director Moon asks Secretary Chae to confirm what she said, and she responds that she's confident she won't ask for anything more, no matter how deep their relationship gets. Director Moon questions if she really doesn't want anything from him, and Secretary Chae affirms, but Director Moon states that her eyes are saying otherwise, filled with desires. He tells her to look at herself, scanning him and getting tense. He points out the contradiction between her words and actions, questioning what he's supposed to do and if she wants it. Director Moon doesn't dislike her for testing him all the time. Instead, he's drawn to her, thinking it might be her irreplaceable desire or his burning affection for her. As they give in to their desires, the tension between them dissipates. Back in the office, Mr. An asks if anyone remembers the Hong Kong hotel deal Director Moon was working on. He shares that they received a call from the Hong Kong branch with good news. Director Moon will have to check it out himself, and Mr. An announces that he's leaving tonight. Miss Kang mentions that she can't go because it's her father's birthday and she has dinner plans. Mr. An accepts, then tells Secretary Chae that she'll have to go instead. However, Secretary Chae expresses her concerns, saying she doesn't think she's experienced enough to assist Director Moon by herself. She asks if Mr. An could go instead, but he responds that he almost forgot it's his son's birthday, and he can't miss it. Secretary Chae wonders if Mr. An's son has a birthday every month. Miss Kang sees this as an opportunity for Secretary Chae to learn from Director Moon himself, pointing out that Director Moon would likely ask for her anyway, even at night. Miss Kang wishes Secretary Chae good luck on her trip with Director Moon, and Secretary Chae sighs, saying, "Very well then." As they make their way to the airport, Secretary Chae walks behind Director Moon. When he turns around, she asks if she can help him, but he responds that he doesn't need anything. However, he does find it bothersome to have someone trailing behind him like a stray puppy. He tells her to walk beside him instead. Secretary Chae blushes and says, "Yes, sir." Director Moon questions what's wrong, and Secretary Chae says it's nothing. She was just looking around. Director Moon grabs her and tells her to look at him as much as she wants. Memories of their time together flash through Secretary Chae's mind. As they continue walking, Director Moon notices that Secretary Chae seems a bit off. He moves closer and says he thinks she has a fever. Secretary Chae attributes her high body temperature to a personal quirk, but Director Moon is concerned. He holds her hands, telling her it's a bad habit to rely only on medicine. Secretary Chae reminds him that it's almost time to board his flight, and Director Moon tells her to come with him. Instead of boarding the flight, Director Moon takes Secretary Chae to a quiet spot. He makes her sit down and asks why she's feeling tense. Secretary Chae denies being tense, but Director Moon interrupts, saying she can take pills if she needs them, but she also needs adequate rest. He calls her frail, which surprises Secretary Chae. She defends herself, saying she's not frail and even works a part-time job on weekends. Director Moon tells her to take a rest and quit her part-time job, asking if it's okay. He covers her with a towel and says he'll wake her up later. Secretary Chae thinks it might be the medicine kicking in, but for the first time, she feels comfortable by Director Moon's side. She feels like she's taking a break at home, which she finds peculiar. Secretary Chae wakes up to find it's morning already. She looks around, taking in her surroundings, and wonders what happened. She tries to piece together the events of the previous day, but her memories are hazy. As she sits up, she notices Director Moon sitting across from her, watching her. Secretary Chae feels a flutter in her chest as their eyes meet. Director Moon walks in and tells Secretary Chae that she's off. She questions if they missed the appointment, and Director Moon explains that his plane will be leaving in an hour, but he'll be going by himself. He tells her to head back home and rest. Secretary Chae asks why he didn't wake her up and what she's supposed to do now. Director Moon reassures her that he pushed the meeting to lunchtime, so it's okay. Secretary Chae worries about his schedule, but Director Moon responds that if the other party can't wait a few more hours, he'd rather not work with them at all. She apologizes for being unprofessional, but Director Moon says he never asked for an apology. He's not a heartless guy who would demand one from someone who's been ill. He explains that it wasn't wrong to let her sleep after she was groaning all night, and he chose not to wake her up, taking responsibility for it. Director Moon asks how she's feeling now, and Secretary Chae says she's getting much better, although she still feels hot. As they continue to talk, Secretary Chae tells Director Moon that she's feeling better now. He hums, holding her hand, and notes that her fever hasn't gone away. Director Moon decides to call her a cab so she can head home and rest. However, Secretary Chae pleads with him to let her go with him, promising to support him the best she can. Director Moon tells her not to, but Secretary Chae reminds him that he took care of her all night, and she's grateful because she feels much better. Director Moon questions what he's going to do with her. Secretary Chae sighs, mentions that the towel is wet, and asks if Director Moon changed it for her because of her fever. He asks what if he did, and Secretary Chae thanks him. Director Moon tells her to get up if she's coming, and Secretary Chae responds with a "Yes, sir." Secretary Chae hums as she gazes at herself in the mirror, noting that she can't go out looking like that. She ties her hair, getting ready for their trip. On the aircraft, she briefs Director Moon that an employee from the Hong Kong branch will greet them upon arrival. She explains that they can use the car throughout the trip, but as for other arrangements, Director Moon interrupts, asking if she doesn't need some rest. Secretary Chae insists she's fine, thanks him, and asks how he's feeling, considering he stayed up all night to care for her. Director Moon leans on her shoulder, responding that he's feeling a bit tired, and he's glad he's not in first class. Secretary Chae reminds him that people can see them, and Director Moon playfully says, "Oh gee," as he wonders why he's feeling so tired. As the aircraft lands, Secretary Chae notices that Director Moon's blanket has fallen off, and he must be cold. She decides to tuck him in before he notices. However, Director Moon opens his eyes immediately, and Secretary Chae asks if he's awake. Director Moon teases her, saying she's the one who needs to be tucked in, not him. Secretary Chae explains that she normally has a high body temperature, so it's okay. Director Moon places his hand on hers, and as he moves closer, he says he's a bit cold, that's all. Secretary Chae sighs, hoping he isn't coming down with a fever. Director Moon reassures her he's not fragile like she is, but then adds that he thinks he's getting hot because of something else. Secretary Chae asks what that is, and Director Moon asks what she thinks. He leans in, suggesting that a quick kiss won't hurt, and says, "Into risk and adventures." Secretary Chae's eyes lock onto his, and Director Moon asks if she's in. He pulls her close, and they share a passionate kiss. Director Moon asks Secretary Chae why she isn't pushing him away, and she responds with a sly smile, saying it's because she likes it. Director Moon hugs her tightly, calling her a naughty girl, and teases her about driving him crazy. Nearby, a gray-haired man approaches Director Moon, expressing concern that their schedule seems too rushed. Director Moon questions if he has a choice, given the unplanned nature of the business trip. The gray-haired man nods, explaining that's exactly why they booked an earlier flight, and asks why Director Moon wants to postpone it. Secretary Chae, walking behind them, mutters under her breath that she's going to take this up with the CEO, complaining about her tired legs. As they prepare to part ways, Director Moon asks Secretary Chae where she's going, and she responds that she's heading back home. Director Moon mentions that they still have work to do, but Secretary Chae expresses concern about his health, worrying that he'll get sick if he doesn't rest tonight. Director Moon reassures her that he's fine and won't leave without her. Secretary Chae insists that he needs rest, but Director Moon suggests they go to his house or the office to finish their work. Secretary Chae admits that she's worried about leaving her sister alone for so long. Director Moon asks why she didn't mention this earlier, and Secretary Chae wonders if he would have let her go if she had. Director Moon offers to drive her home, but Secretary Chae says it's okay, as the bus from the airport stops near her house. However, Director Moon informs her that there aren't any buses at this hour and requests to take her home instead. Director Moon pulls up to Secretary Chae's place, and she thanks him for driving her. He says he'll leave after seeing her off safely. However, Secretary Chae objects, worried about what others might think if they see them together. Director Moon asks if he cares about what others think, and Secretary Chae mentions her name, wondering why she's so concerned. Director Moon reassures her that nobody would judge them for just standing together, explaining that to others, they just look like a manager and his employee. He tells her not to worry and to head inside. Secretary Chae bids him good night, and he responds in kind. As Secretary Chae enters her home, her sister greets her with a, "Hey sis." Secretary Chae explains that Director Moon drove her home because it was getting late. Her sister's eyes widen as she asks if Director Moon drove her home alone. Secretary Chae tells her to come inside, but her sister insists on saying hello to Director Moon. He responds, and they exchange greetings. Secretary Chae's sister asks if he's keeping track of her overtime pay, and Director Moon jokes that he's trying his best to keep her satisfied with her work. Secretary Chae's sister expresses concern about her safety, given the number of psychos out there, and Director Moon acknowledges her worries. At a restaurant, Director Moon treats Secretary Chae and her sister to dinner. Secretary Chae's sister gushes about how handsome and rich Director Moon is, but Secretary Chae declines his offer to pay, insisting on covering the meal herself. Director Moon teases her, asking if he can't even treat his employee's family to barbecue. He reassures her that money is no object and promises to take her out for more delicious meals. Secretary Chae's sister excitedly screams, "Okay," while Secretary Chae looks on, less than thrilled. After dinner, Secretary Chae thanks Director Moon for the meal and excuses herself, leaving him and her sister alone. She tells them to take their time, and Director Moon comments on her sister's energetic personality, noting that she's quite different from Secretary Chae. Secretary Chae thanks him again and wishes him a safe drive home. As she turns to leave, Director Moon reminds her that she'll call him, but Secretary Chae seems puzzled, wondering why he'd expect her to call. As soon as Secretary Chae walks in the door, her sister starts questioning her about her conversation with Director Moon. Secretary Chae tries to brush it off, saying they just said goodbye, but her sister is intrigued. She points out that Director Moon must really like Secretary Chae, given how charming he was to their family. Secretary Chae denies any romantic involvement, but her sister is skeptical. The conversation takes a nosy turn when Secretary Chae's sister asks if they've spent the night together already. Secretary Chae yells that it's none of her business, but her sister persists, teasing her about not being a little kid anymore. Secretary Chae tells her to stop and focus on her studies, but her sister keeps pushing, asking if they're just friends with benefits. Secretary Chae loses her patience, yelling at her sister to shut up. Undeterred, Secretary Chae's sister encourages her to pursue a relationship with Director Moon, asking why not and suggesting that if it doesn't work out, they can just break up. Secretary Chae tries to explain that some people are just out of reach, no matter how much you like them. Her sister grabs her, asking if there's something wrong with Director Moon or if Secretary Chae is just being picky. Secretary Chae's sister feels annoyed as Secretary Chae starts to say something, but trails off. Secretary Chae yells that there's nothing wrong with her, listing her accomplishments: graduating from a prestigious university on a scholarship, being pretty and fit. Her sister asks what else she needs, and Secretary Chae says she's scaring her. Her sister exclaims, "Oh," and questions if being an orphan is the issue, but Secretary Chae says that's not it. Her sister presses her, asking what's wrong, and Secretary Chae finally opens up, hugging her sister. Her sister is taken aback, asking when Secretary Chae grew up so much. Secretary Chae tells her sister to focus on her studies, put off dating until she graduates, and stay out of her love life. Her sister agrees, and Secretary Chae asks if she's okay. Just then, Secretary Chae's phone rings, and her sister informs her before leaving her alone to take the call. Secretary Chae answers, asking Director Moon if he got home safely. Director Moon asks what she was doing, and Secretary Chae replies that she was getting changed. Director Moon asks if she's not cold, and Secretary Chae says she won't be outside for long. She thanks him again for driving her home and being nice to her sister. Director Moon tells her to come downstairs, revealing that he's still outside her place. Secretary Chae springs up, asking why he didn't leave. Director Moon says he misses her too much. Secretary Chae blushes, telling him she's coming down. As she rushes downstairs, Secretary Chae calls out Director Moon's name. He responds, and she pants out of breath. Director Moon teases her, asking if she's okay. Secretary Chae smiles, happy to see him again. Director Moon reaches for Secretary Chae's face, saying hey as he does so. He mentions that she might call their relationship indecent, but Secretary Chae tries to apologize and explain herself. However, Director Moon steps closer, telling her to do as she pleases, but not to push him away. He warns her that he's going to kiss her now. The kiss is especially gentle, leaving Secretary Chae breathless. Every word Director Moon says and every move he makes sends her heart racing. She can't help but feel drawn to him, even though she knows he's out of her league and she'd never dare confess her feelings. The next day, Secretary Chae is busy typing away on her computer, her mind wandering back to the previous night's events. Miss Kang calls her, asking if she needs help with the report she's working on, but Secretary Chae insists she's got it covered. Miss Kang teases her, saying she's gotten really good at her job. Then she asks why they had to reschedule Secretary Chae's flight on the day of the trip. Secretary Chae pretends not to know what Miss Kang is talking about, so Miss Kang explains that they'd last heard she and Director Moon had arrived at the airport, but then Director Moon suddenly wanted Mr. An to reschedule. Miss Kang presses Secretary Chae for details, but Secretary Chae insists nothing happened between them. Just then, Director Moon walks in, asking if something was supposed to happen. Miss Kang admits she didn't see him standing there. Director Moon asks why Miss Kang is so curious, pointing out that it's not relevant to her work. Mr. An quickly jumps in to smooth things over, explaining that Miss Kang was only asking out of concern for Secretary Chae's well-being. He assures Director Moon that Miss Kang was worried about unwanted rumors spreading. Mr. An pleads with Director Moon to overlook the mistake. Director Moon asks if Miss Kang started the rumors, but she denies it. He then asks Mr. An if he was responsible, but Mr. An also says no. Director Moon questions why they're interrogating Secretary Chae over baseless claims. Miss Kang and Mr. An both bow and apologize to Director Moon. He then tells Secretary Chae that they should have a chat in his office. Secretary Chae walks into Director Moon's office, greeting him by name. She asks how she can help him. Director Moon explains that he could tell she was feeling flustered, so he wanted to intervene. Secretary Chae asks why he's telling her this, wondering if he's fishing for a compliment. Director Moon admits that he is, and Secretary Chae obliges, saying that she was indeed flustered. But he did step in quickly. She thanks him for his help. Director Moon reveals that all he did that night was call Mr. An to change their flight, but it seems Mr. An spilled the beans to Miss Kang. Secretary Chae notes that Miss Kang and Mr. An are close. Director Moon asks if anyone is bullying her, and Secretary Chae says no. Director Moon affirms that no one should dare bother her, but admits that they do get on his nerves. Secretary Chae offers to be more careful so they don't bother him, but Director Moon clarifies that he just wants to look out for her. He then asks if they can go home together tonight. Secretary Chae agrees, saying she'll get ready. She asks if she can be excused, and Director Moon nods. Director Moon holds Secretary Chae's hand, his eyes locked on hers as he confesses his overwhelming feelings. Secretary Chae's face flushes and she offers to help him out, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The door swings open and Director Moon's gaze flicks to the newcomer, his expression a mix of surprise and guilt. Secretary Chae turns around, her eyes widening as she takes in the scene. The newcomer's face is a picture of shock and disapproval. Director Moon and Secretary Chae quickly compose themselves, their faces reddening as they try to play it cool. The newcomer walks up to them, their eyes blazing with anger and disappointment. Director Moon's mother, elegant and poised, looks like she's about to explode. Secretary Chae greets Director Moon's mother with a slight bow before beating a hasty retreat, leaving the two of them alone. Director Moon's mother turns on him, her expression a mix of anger and disappointment. She scolds him for his behavior, her voice low and even. Director Moon tries to deflect her anger, but his mother is having none of it. She demands to know what's going on between him and Secretary Chae, her eyes narrowing as she waits for an answer. Director Moon knows he's in trouble, and he tries to stall, but his mother is relentless. Director Moon's mother declares that she doesn't care what's going on between him and Secretary Chae, insisting that he will marry the daughter of the family they've arranged for him to marry. Director Moon apologizes, but firmly states that he has no intention of obeying her. He questions whether she wants him to spend the rest of his life with someone he doesn't love. His mother is taken aback, yelling, "What?" Director Moon explains that he's still busy investigating what happened to Yoon-soo and hasn't found the person responsible yet. He accuses his mother of wanting to cover up the truth, just like his father and their relatives. He's determined to clear Yoon-soo's name and won't let the case go. Director Moon takes a call, thanking the person on the other end for their hard work. As he hangs up, he sees Moon Yoon-soo, who happily calls out to him and waves. He's surprised to see her and asks what she's doing there. Yoon-soo explains that she got out of school early due to mock exams and wanted to see him. She suggests they grab something nice to eat, like barbecue. Director Moon is taken aback by her suggestion, but eventually agrees, offering to buy her anything she wants. As they walk, he notices bruises on her wrist and asks what happened. Yoonsu's expression turns somber and she asks if he really cares about her. She accuses him of not helping her when she needed it most, saying she trusted him, but he didn't come to save her. With tears in her eyes, she asks why he hates her so much. Director Moon is overcome with emotion, apologizing profusely. Yoonsu's words cut deep, saying he made her feel unalive. Director Moon jolts awake to find Secretary Chae calling his name. She tells him she tried to wake him up, but he was out cold. He's clearly shaken, and Secretary Chae asks if he had a bad dream. Director Moon hugs her tightly, begging her to stay with him for a moment. Secretary Chae pats his back reassuringly, and eventually, Director Moon composes himself, saying it's okay. Sitting beside him, Secretary Chae asks if he's all right, and Director Moon reveals that this happens from time to time. Secretary Chae presses him for more information, and Director Moon opens up about his sister's passing a few years ago. Secretary Chae is surprised, having thought he was an only child. Director Moon explains that Eunsu was his half-sister, whom he neglected and hated. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a group of friends are hanging out, discussing what to have for dinner. One of them suggests an option, and another exclaims, "Wow," at how fun the evening has been. Director Moon walks with two friends, checking his phone to find a flurry of texts from Moon Eunsu. She's asking if he's home, pleading with him to come pick her up, and saying she's scared. One of Director Moon's friends calls out to him, asking what's up, while the other teases him about disappearing on them again. Director Moon assures them he's coming, joking that he's the one on leave today. He pokes fun at his friend's excitement, saying that if Moon Eunsu attended their gatherings more often, they wouldn't be so desperate for social interaction. As Director Moon recounts the tragic events, his voice cracks with emotion. He remembers the day his stepsister was murdered, a day when he and his friends were carefree and laughing. Later, when he discovered her diary, he was shocked to learn that someone had been stalking her and that she had been crying out for help. Her diary entries reveal her fear and desperation, questioning who was following her and why. She felt abandoned, with no one to turn to. Director Moon is overcome with guilt and regret, unable to forgive himself for ignoring her pleas for help. Secretary Chae listens intently, tears streaming down her face. Director Moon confesses that if he had only gone to his sister that day, she might still be alive. He blames himself for her death, but Secretary Chae tries to comfort him, urging him not to be too hard on himself. She reminds him that everyone has their own regrets and that they can't let the past define them. They need to focus on living in the present. Secretary Chae asks Director Moon if he ever imagined they'd end up together in this unconventional relationship. She points out that life is full of surprises, some good, some bad. She encourages him not to beat himself up over his past mistakes, and shares that crying can be a great way to release pent-up emotions. Director Moon teases her about crying after their first night together, and Secretary Chae playfully deflects, asking what else he'd like to talk about. Secretary Chae responds that there are other things on her mind, but she's actually drawing a blank. An awkward silence fills the air until she breaks it by asking Director Moon how he managed to control his urges before they started their secret relationship. Director Moon raises an eyebrow, questioning if he looks like someone who sleeps around with just anyone. He explains that he's always been too busy with work to even think about casual hookups, but when it comes to Secretary Chae, he's completely lost control. He confesses that he can't get enough of her, and it's driving him crazy. He genuinely doesn't understand what's happening to him. Secretary Chae addresses him as Director Moon, out of habit, but he corrects her, asking her to call him by his name when they're not at work. He shares that his sister Yejin thinks he's bullying Secretary Chae because she always calls him Director Moon. Secretary Chae notices that he still looks a bit pale and expresses her concern. Director Moon brushes it off, saying he's always been pale. He takes her hand, suggesting that if she's worried about him, she should help him take his mind off things. Secretary Chae agrees, and they share a tender moment together. If you're eager for the next chapter, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, ciao!